Hello, and welcome to Life Beyond the Numbers, the podcast for people who are curious about how to have a more fulfilling work life. We live in a world largely driven by numbers, logic, and reason. But how we feel at work and about our work impacts us, our organisations, and society. There is a relationship between the numbers of our organisations and the life beyond the numbers. I'm Susan Michelon, your host. I've lived and worked in many countries. I've met people who love what they do and people who don't, people who bring their full selves to work and people who won't. But one thing that I've learned that is common to us all is that we are all unique and have unique experiences. And it's helpful to know that there are others who think like we do, or have had struggles too, or have gone where we want to go, or can show us things we didn't know. So join me and my guests as we place a lens on the human side of work life by sharing insights, stories, and strategies to inspire you to let your uniqueness shine through. Well, today I am absolutely delighted to welcome Dan White to Life Beyond the Numbers. Dan, you're so welcome.
Thank you so much, Susan. It's so fun to be here.
It's great. And Dan, you're over in Guernsey at the moment.
Yes, and the Channel Islands, that beautiful little crown jewel of the UK, just south of England.
Well, I'd love to be by the sea. I'm stuck. No, I'm not stuck, but I'm in Oxford, as far away from the sea as you almost can be in the UK. But I grew up beside the sea and I miss it.
There is something very life-affirming, isn't it, about being close to the water?
Yeah, I think if that's what you grew up with. But I know a lot of people that would rather the mountains, and I think it depends on your own environment. But yeah, the sea for me always. So Dan, I'm going to ask you what many people might think is a bizarre question. Will you honestly tell me how you slept last night?
Of an average over the last 7 to 14 days, last night probably wasn't my peak. I suppose I was reading for an hour or two before bed. I probably hit the pillow about 9:45. We've got some exciting things going on at the moment with our charity. So the mind was quite busy, problem solving, dealing with challenges, wondering about possibilities, all those things that happen to us modern human beings. I don't have a clock in my room, but probably drifted off a little bit slower than usual, maybe 30 minutes this time, 45 minutes. Got up to pop to the little boy's room once during the night, and then probably woke up around 5:45 just before the sunrise. So yeah, for me, I'd give it a solid 7 last night. Sometimes I sleep a little bit earlier, sometimes waking up feeling a little bit fresher. But I think probably a lot of people can relate to that. There's a broad spectrum of recovery that we tend to experience, especially in this modern world, overstimulated, always something to do, always connected to someone or something, some thought, some idea. So I don't think that for a modern human being, I'm doing that bad.
Well, I love the detail in the answer because most people I'd ask that question to, if I did ask that question, might just tell me fine, or not as good as any other night, or better than usual. But you actually can talk me through your night in what you can remember. Why the fascination with sleep?
Great question. Asking people how they slept last night is the question for me now, which has replaced how are you? I think the idea of how are you? How are you feeling? I don't think that people even asked their friends, colleagues, co-workers, family that question, and maybe until the last 10 years when mental health has become such an important locus of conversation. But in my early life, I didn't sleep well. I slept terribly, in fact, as a teenager and a young adult. And as a result, my mental health was never really good. And it wasn't until a career, maybe some of the details of which I'll give you, that spanned the last decade and a half that I've come to understand that actually how I slept the night before is probably the key indicator of the stress that I'm experiencing, or at least one of key indicators when it comes to stress. My energy levels, my mood, my focus, concentration, drive, all of these sorts of things. So yeah, for me, it's become a healthy obsession, I guess, over the last 10 years of my career to understand more about this thing that we call sleep. What is it? How can we do it better in the modern world, knowing that many of our environmental circumstances have changed a lot since we were more ancestral humans living in contact with the earth without all the stresses and challenges that we have now. But knowing what I know about sleep, reading the research, which is ever growing, quite junior in terms of academia. A lot of what we know about sleep is really only the last decade that we're discovering this stuff, or maybe 2 decades. It takes a long time for that information to filter down into mass consciousness. It takes a long time for it to reach your doctor's office, your GP, never mind your organization. So ultimately, yeah, if you knew what I knew about sleep, you would probably take some care or invest some time into knowing how to do it a little bit better and being aware of ways that you might be shortchanging or shortfalling and what you can do to address that.
And I think what's interesting there, Daniel, you said your question to people has changed from how are you to how did you sleep last night? How do people respond?
It's interesting, isn't it? I think when I started asking that question about 2 years ago, people were rather shocked
Yeah.
because sleep has been a huge taboo, right? We've to some extent broken down the taboo of well-being in the workplace. How are you? We approached that one first. How are you feeling? And then it was like, how are you sleeping? And then people start to think, well, I'm not telling you the intricacies of how I slept in my bed last night. Was I wearing socks or not, or clothes, or how many duvets did you use and what color is it? It's not that sort of question, is it? The question is, how did you recover last night and how are you feeling today as a result? Maybe I get a slightly different answer to that question because people know me as kind of the sleep guy, the guy that's always preaching and having to educate and things like that. I don't know if people would answer me in the same way that they would answer their director who've asked that question. But I do wish it was something that everybody was asking more about.
I remember, as you're saying that, I remember I spent a lot of my career working in Asia and different places. And I remember one of my Indian colleagues one time telling me that when he started to work with Europeans first, the conversation that amazed him most was people discussing in the morning how they had slept the previous night. Because they never talked about this, he said, certainly where he grew up or in his life. And he felt it was because they always slept well because they were doing manual labor a lot of the time. You've touched briefly on changes over the decades, but how has that impacted our ability to sleep?
It's a very interesting question. I was sitting outside on the grass eating my lunch before we recorded this podcast, and I was thinking, what is the key message that I would like to get across? And you've taken us straight to the source there.
I
I
was
guess
sitting outside too, so maybe we were communicating.
quantumly entangled.
Yeah.
So I guess for me, to understand that there are as many different people in the world as there are different sleepers. Okay. So between individuals, there's many nuances. Some people sleep poorly because of stress, because of chronic health conditions, because of severe challenges with their mental and physical health, because of disability, because of parenthood. Some might say that's a disability at some times in life, because of all sorts of factors. Okay. But by far and large, something that has impacted almost everybody, although perhaps maybe not to as great an extent those people in Asia, is our proximity to and exposure to non-native electric fields in our environment. Let me take my tinfoil hat off to tell you this one. But ultimately, as a species on planet Earth, we are the only species that no longer lives in connection with Mother Nature. And by that, I mean physically touching the earth. Now, I can caveat and say that there are a lot of domesticated animals that are no longer touching the earth physically because they're, chickens or other animals in kind of mass agricultural industries locked in cages. A very sad story. Or, home pets, stuff like that. And what we tend to see is actually a lot of these animals that are severed from nature. They experience a lot of the downfalls and the pitfalls that we do. So you got to understand that for the entirety of our evolution, and I'm talking about 99.9999999% of the time that we've been alive as a species, Homo sapien, wise man on planet Earth, we lived outdoors. Okay, we didn't live inside of homes. We built shelters. We lived in caves, mud huts, depending on which historians you talk to. Maybe there was megaliths and monoliths in societies much earlier than we first appeared to assume. But even the last 15,000 years, for example, is really a grain of sand on the beach in terms of our evolutionary history. The dichotomy that we have now is that we have harnessed two things. We've harnessed indoors, we've harnessed temperature, and we've harnessed light. Okay, so we now live these indoor lifestyles surrounded by screens, technology devices, conventional light sources, which are built for energy efficiency, not because they have any comprehension of the impact they're having on human health. We're surrounded by Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, 3G, 4G, 5G, electronics of all kinds. And I'm not going to say that these are terrible things, that we should throw our mobile phones and our laptops out the window, et cetera, et cetera. But unfortunately, there is a kind of agenda that is stopping us from understanding what the contraindications are of these types of technology. And the truth is that step aside from that, go back to Kansas with Dorothy, and we all lived outdoors. We wore perhaps leather shoes. Leather is a conductive material. We walked on early pavements, on grass, on sand, on beaches, in water. We were exposed to the rising sun in the morning and the setting sun in the evening. And even if it was cloudy and overcast and foggy and raining and windy and winter, we were outside all the time. There was no glass, there was no sunglasses, there was no prescription glasses, there was no contact lenses, there was no car windows, office windows, and we weren't trapped inside. And what I will say about being trapped inside is I believe that's a choice. I know many of us have to work indoors, but there are ample opportunities once we make that decision to reconnect with nature. So it's really this disconnection from nature which has such a fundamental impact on our biology and especially our sleep, because the number one aspect of it is it drives the stress response. So exposure to a lot of these what we call non-native, so that means not from Earth itself, not resonating from the Earth, electronic fields, so everything Aoife mentioned, and that and these conventional types of lighting, they increase stress within the body. Okay, and we can do things to counterbalance that, like go outside and get natural light and all these sorts of things. But for the majority of humans, I think the latest research demonstrated that, you know, in the early part of the 20th century, so say the year 1900, before we really became a mass industrialized society, and we spent 90% of our time outdoors, like your Asian friends, working on the land, doing hard labor and moving every day, getting lots of exposure to natural light. Probably in the case of Asia, maybe in the rice paddies with the leeches sucking on your toes, your feet in the earth. And now we spend about 7% of our time outdoors. And if you actually kind of think about that as a number, 7%. So if you said 10%, 10% of your entire day, 24 hours in a day, it's 2 hours and 40 minutes, if I'm correct there. Well, you might, I certainly do, but does everybody spend 2 hours and 40 minutes outdoors every day? 10%? I don't think so. So I think those statistics could even be slightly skewed in some direction, especially in the winter, you know, when it gets windy and cold, and we deserve to be warm and we deserve to be cozy and comforted. And there's nothing wrong with that whatsoever. But we need to understand that in order to have a strong rhythmic connection with the earth and to have strong internal rhythms which govern not only the quality and the quantity and the timing of our sleep, but also actually the functioning of every single cell and system, organ of the body, we have to reconnect with nature. And so to come back to the original point in that story, what happened? Well, the West became mass industrialized and our technological advancements came at a lot quicker pace than some parts of Asia. Obviously, a lot of the technology came from other parts of Asia. But ultimately, I see disparate challenges when it comes to sleep all across the globe. And more so now in these Asian countries as global workforces kind of stretch the limits of time zones and where and how people were. So yeah, that's a bit of a long-winded answer to a short question, but I guess I wanted to get straight to the point.
And I'm so glad you did, because it's also fascinating. So, two things. What can we do, perhaps, or how? as you were talking about the time, I was thinking, oh my God, it sounds like a prison sentence. You know, when you watch movies and the prisoners are allowed outside for 1 hour a day. I mean, it really doesn't sound like we're doing a whole lot more. So we are trapped inside. That's one thing. What can we do? And in the obvious is go outside, but there must be other ways to entice people, perhaps. And then the second thing, which is probably related, is you're involved in educating people around sleep. For somebody listening to this thinking, I don't need to be educated around sleep, what would you say to that? And I think they're related, but take them whatever way you want.
Okay, so straight to your audience then. Let's talk a little bit about this idea of sleep. You know, for a really long period of time, there was this idea that the golden number was 8 hours, and that actually there's a badge of honor to be upheld from sleeping as little as possible, especially in this capitalist, productive society where we go to work and we have an agenda of a to-do list for the day, and we're chargeable to every hour, and we get more and more and more and more and more done. But what we don't realize is that the quality of our work suffers massively, and more importantly, the quality of our life is handicapped, because whether it's how we focus, our innovation, our creativity, our engagement in work, or when we get home, the kids and the family and our relationships and our mental and emotional health. We don't have to be in a relationship or married or have children to experience a disconnect once we leave the office if we're sleep deprived. So, you know, that quote, I don't know who said it, but the most dangerous phrase in the English language is "we've always done it this way." I'm not sure if I butchered that slightly, but I hear that a lot from clients in later generations. So people age kind of 40, 45, probably 50 plus. Obviously, once you've been doing something a certain way for 10 years, 20 years, unless you have a really open growth mindset, then your ability to seek change tends to diminish. And I always say to people, you know, psychology is such a huge aspect of sleep. You know, there's four key components that I focus on in my work and my programs, and it's the environment. So looking, you know, we've spoken a lot about environmental things, talked about light exposure, we talked about the electronic environment. There's more parts to that. There's behavior. So you would be shocked if I told you that almost every single thing that we do from the moment we wake up until the moment we go to bed is an amalgamation of the quality later that night of how we sleep. And then there's the psychology. Psychology is really this idea that our beliefs govern our behavior, govern our choices, our actions. They also govern our biology as well, actually. So if we think stressful thoughts, if we believe that we can't change our sleep, as Henry Ford said, whether you think you can or you think you can't, you're probably right. And then the fourth element that I like to work people around is culture. And culture and psychology feed really well together, because the culture of organizations, of family, of society is not one in which we have prioritized sleep and rest and recovery. And that idea of I'll sleep when I'm dead is a really funny old adage, and quite ironic, because we know that we're heading towards an early grave if we don't pay a little bit of attention towards this stuff. With all that being said, when I work with people, it's about how you communicate, because ultimately I know a lot about very fringe topics when it comes to health and well-being, and information that if I continue to deliberate on and share with you today, people may switch off. People may think this is too much, this is overwhelming, this is, what are we supposed to do? We live in these modern societies and I've got to work and I've got to do this and that. But it's really about coming back down to baseline and saying, how much better do you think you'd feel, think, and perform if the quality of your sleep was to improve by 10 or 20%? It doesn't mean I need you to sleep more hours. It doesn't mean that you're going to have to go to bed earlier, that you're going to have to necessarily, to begin with, avoid your favorite TV program, or doing all the chores after the kids go to bed, or getting up early to be in the office and be the champion that you want to be. But what if I told you that if you learn about these four elements, the behavior, the environment, the culture, and the psychology, that you could improve the quality of your sleep without necessarily needing to shift the needle on the quantity? And then people start to go, okay, yeah, so you're telling me that you can improve my performance without taking my time away, because that's ultimately what people are fearful of, I think, is to give them more time to sleep. Although ironically, we could argue that you become more efficient and you gain time back with greater health. But that's maybe a whole nother conversation. So yeah, it's really about helping people to understand that quantity is like, you know, value expressed in numbers, and quality is like the efficiency of that thing. So once we shift that conversation towards quality, then we can begin to talk about the simplest, lowest hanging fruit, the greatest return on investment in terms of this behavior, environment, culture, psychology piece. What are the 5 things, for example, that I can get you to do today that you're going to come back tomorrow and go, okay, I'm in now. I get it. Yeah, that works. I didn't have to do a lot and I feel a lot better. So working with human psychology is one thing altogether compared to being the expert that just espouses his knowledge and kind of shares it for the sake of his own glorified ego, I think. So learning how to meet people where they're at is probably one of the most important parts of my job.
Mm. And you talked about workplaces, the culture there. Is it something that leaders are beginning to take seriously, Dan?
I think, as you probably experienced, some, some, not just, I think, the trailblazers, not just the early adopters. Now I'm seeing more and more people, more and more organizations, whether it's mental health driven policy or a genuine interest and understanding or an increase in awareness due to the incredible work of people like Matthew Walker and other sleep scientists who have put the need for good sleep on the map. There's definitely a growing interest and awareness into this area. And I think it's about time, really. And it encompasses a lot kind of a greater conversation, not just around sleep, but also around our circadian rhythms and our body's clocks and how this ultimately influences every single thing that we do. And from the moment that we're born until the moment that we die, it's not just a conversation of how we slept last night, but sleep is kind of the most obvious outward manifestation of these 24-hour rhythms in our bodies. So I think as soon as people started to see the evidence and the research, which is, unequivocal at this point, the impact that sleep has on performance, on health and well-being, on engagement, those sorts of things, then obviously as long as people see the bottom line, people see the numbers, and then they begin to understand that it's about being beyond the numbers, hopefully, over time.
Absolutely, Dan. It totally is. I think we tend to normalize whatever we do. So if we are happily going about our lives with 5 hours sleep a night or 6 hours sleep per night, that isn't great quality or whatever, we don't question that because it's what we do. For me, I've always prioritized sleep and it's always been really, really important to me. And if I don't get good quality sleep, I know I'm just not functioning in the same way. But I think we can have a stage where if that happens gradually with your sleep quality decreasing, you don't notice. We don't know what we don't know effectively. So how does someone know if their quality of their sleep isn't where it should be?
Yeah, that's a really, really good question. You're very right. We become kind of accustomed and we normalize the things that happen in our lives. And I can think back to a period of time where my early to middle to late adolescence, there was a lot of technology use, there's a lot of video gaming, there's a lot of late nights and screens. I was not the early bird that I am now. I was very much the extreme night owl. And waking up after 5 or 6 hours sleep every night, taking 3 hours to get my head together before going to school or going to work, wherever I was going, that was just my kind of normal. And again, throughout my early adult life, burning the candle at both ends as a young student and having deadlines and all those sorts of things, it kind of does become normalized. And so it's very interesting, how do you raise awareness of those things? I think one of the things that we're championing through our organization, our foundation at the moment, is helping people to learn through the experiences of others. So having that like champion within your organization, within your workplace. Quite often when I conduct training and education for organizations, it's because some one person in the organization who has so magnificently been benefited by a few simple, small changes to their environment or their behavior or whatever, is they're like, wow, I see the opportunity for the entire organization just to shift 20% in the positive direction from this sort of simple stuff. So I guess it can only be experienced. We say in science, N=1, like you are the experiment, I guess. And this is where, again, I like to come back to like the simplest things that can help people to experience some of the greatest change and benefit really quickly. Because all it takes is for you to wake up that next day and feel like, oh, I didn't have to snooze the alarm, or had a little bit more energy, or that's when the buy-in comes. And we've got to appreciate that indoctrinating people into a full sleep academy of education is just not something that's accessible for most people. To begin with, is how do you start a fitness regime where you go to the gym one time, or you find a running club and you commit to once a week, or you start to go for a walk in the morning, and slowly over time, if you have a fascination and an interest and you feel the benefits of that, you may sustain it, or you may build on these habits.
Yeah, small incremental changes, step by step, and noticing, isn't it? And I think if we go right back to the first question that you answered, how you slept, it's also that reflecting on your night and actually analyzing it, and not to the nth degree, but other than just the shorthand, fine, grand, not so good, terrible, you actually deconstruct your night a little bit and see what works and what doesn't work. Because I think that's something else you made very clear, is variation is the norm, and what works for me may not work for you, and vice versa.
Yeah, and I guess you could segment the night just for people to get a little bit of a thought. I think a really recent Matthew Walker and Andrew Huberman podcast raised this awesome analogy, which is, I'm going to butcher it now, but it's quality, quantity, consistency, and there's a fourth factor. And I don't use this analogy myself. I will look it up in a moment. But the idea being that, are you consistently able to fall asleep fairly quickly? Do you stay asleep consistently throughout the night? Is your sleep generally quite consistent from day to day, from week to week? Do you get up consistent regular time, or are you consistently awoken during the night? Do you consistently wake up several times throughout the night? Do you consistently struggle to get to sleep? When you wake up in the morning, do you feel like you're ready to jump out of bed, or are you smashing the snooze button? These kind of questions can help us to understand, okay, well, we're not in Kansas anymore. We're not our ancestors. We're probably not all winding down, drifting off, sleeping deeply throughout the night and waking up in a state of, total bliss. But within ourselves, if we ask the question, do I feel rested when I wake up in the morning? Do I find it easy to fall asleep? And do I stay asleep consistently throughout the night? If any of those kind of questions bring up challenged answers, then you kind of know that there's a little bit of work that can be done. And I think what's really interesting to me is that the quality and the quantity, or the expression of our sleep, it's really like a continuum. Okay, so it's like so many things in life. There is no black and white. And a lot of us say, I'm a good sleeper or I'm a bad sleeper. Okay. But what if you understood that if sleep wasn't on the continuum from 0 to 100, if you are a person who scores 10 out of 100, well, you've got arguably, I don't know you'd ever get to 100, but anybody, but you've got, 90% space to move. If you're somebody who thinks you're a 7 out of 10, well, you've got 30% space. If you're someone who thinks you're 9 out of 10, well, you've got 10% space. And what happens when you improve the quality, if we were to gamify it and say that plus 10 sleep score results in plus 10 strength, plus 10 focus, plus 10 mood, plus 10 energy, those sorts of different things in life, it starts to contextualize that the latest sleep science is out there. A lot of it is within reach. A lot of it's free, these days. So if any of those questions kind of pique your interest, then maybe it's time to invest a little bit of your time into doing that thing better.
Absolutely. And let's go back as well to circadian rhythms, or you said the 24-hour rhythm, or the body clock. And again, this is something I've learned about quite recently, I think. And maybe someone told me years ago. I've certainly read it in books and not been conscious that I read it until I come across it again. So maybe you could talk a little bit as to what that is, our body clock and those rhythms.
Yeah, absolutely. If you've only heard of it recently, it wouldn't surprise me. A lot of the latest kind of and grandest findings around circadian rhythmicity, the molecular mechanisms, for example, the Nobel Prize, I think, was only given in the last 10 years or so. And as I said, it takes a long time for people who are not abreast of the latest scientific journals, or who you are extremely passionate about their health and well-being, to be up to date on the latest science. So the word circadian rhythm, or the word circadian rhythm, you can break the word circadian down. Circa means approximately in Latin, and diem means a day. So this is a rhythm that spans approximately a day. Now, what we know is that all life on Earth has evolved as a result of, the Earth's rotation around the sun, and the Earth spinning on its axis every day, and us having these periods, not exactly 24 hours, but approximately 24 hours periods of light and dark. Okay. And so human beings, let's just talk about humans because it's much, much easier. We're diurnal creatures. What on earth does that mean? It means we're not nocturnal. So if we were nocturnal like the bat or the owl, we'd be awake all night and we'd sleep all day, but we're not. We're diurnal. So throughout the daytime, as far as every other piece of evidence I've ever seen, human beings are active. We are up when it's light, when it's hotter. We are moving, we are building camps, we are hunting, fishing, gathering, picking berries, or at least we were for that 99.999%. And so every single day, there was one major time cue in our environment, which controlled our body's clock. And it wasn't something we ever had to think about because we were outdoors all the time and we were always exposed to the sun. And when the sun set, it was always dark. And perhaps there was a little bit more light from the moon at certain periods of the month. And perhaps eventually when we discovered fire, when we started to use fire regularly, we could extend our evenings a little bit. But really, it's light and natural light and dark, these 24-hour cycles that control our body clock. The most obvious outward manifestation of the body clock is our sleep and our wake cycles. Okay, so what happens is that light entering the eye through special photoreceptors, what we call melanopsin pigment cells in the eye, detects the light in the environment. So these are non-visual photoreceptors. So they don't help us to see color or form or shape or brightness. They just send signals straight to this area of the brain where the master circadian clock lives. Bit of a tongue twister, this one. We call it the suprachiasmatic nucleus. Just call it the SCN for short. It's a very small kind of P-shaped area of the brain just behind the eyes. So information largely comes through the eyes in the form of the light, the time of the day, etc. Programs the brain, and then the brain sends that information from the SCN out to every organ, system, and cell of the body. Okay, so we have trillions of what we call mitochondria within our cells. They're like the energy centers of the cell, okay, producing metabolic water, producing ATP, which is the energy currency of life. And every single one of those mitochondria has its own circadian rhythm. Okay, so how we repair, recuperate, regenerate on a cellular level is controlled by our 24-hour biological clocks. And our 24-hour biological clocks are most chiefly controlled by the type of light, the color and the brightness of light that enters in through our eyes, although to a lesser extent our skin too. And then there are other behaviors as well, such as when we eat, how we exercise, how we socialize, those sorts of things. But the most major of those is the light exposure. On a fundamental level, every single organ, system, and cell of the body, from our appetite, how we burn and metabolize fuel, our cognition, how when we think most clearly, our cardiovascular system, strength, physical performance in our body, our libido, our immune system, everything really is covered and controlled by these clocks. And to go back to that first point of discussion, the largest thing that's changed for us, especially in the last 100 years, magnanimously in the last 20, since we've kind of regulated the lighting industry to be this conventional LED bulb now that we have everywhere, is that our circadian rhythms have become hugely disrupted. And so now circadian rhythm disruption, by far, it's in my opinion, and the opinion of many other scientists, probably the most widespread form of health disadvantage in the world. I've been looking recently because we're running a challenge soon, and we were looking for inspiration at other challenges that have taken place. And do you remember the ASL, the Ice Bucket Challenge?
Yes, yeah.
So yeah, we figured out that about 0.009% of people in the world are afflicted with ASL, and obviously there was a huge wave of awareness and a great fundraising done for that. But many people aren't aware right now that 100% of people in the modern world are potentially having their circadian rhythms disrupted, which downstream is causing or implicated in every major chronic disease. So I'm talking in infancy, sleep, mood, growth, neurological development, if your circadian rhythms aren't functioning properly, in childhood, adolescence, things like autism, ADHD, mood, behavior, again, learning, all of those things are implicated. Further down the line as we age, neurodegenerative conditions, the Alzheimer's, the dementias, the heart disease, diabetes, autoimmune conditions. There really is a piece of the pie for every area of our health, and obviously especially circadian disruptive sleep disorders as well. So I think it's really interesting. Inflammation has been a big buzzword over the last 10 years. Let's do an anti-inflammatory diet. Let's stop the things that make us stressed and inflamed. But really the master orchestrator of the repair systems and the aging systems in our body are these circadian signals. So yeah, it's exciting time to be alive, because although we are probably in the worst state of circadian health that we've ever been as a species, especially since COVID, when we got glued to screens and entertainment indoors, and now the whole world's going to smart technology and smart light bulbs and increasingly brighter and brighter everything. Alongside that, there's this huge shift in awareness towards choices that we can make on a day-to-day basis in our homes and our environments and our behaviors, even in our workplaces, that help us to balance and bring more synchrony back to our circadian rhythms. And the great thing about it is that a lot of what we do around our circadian rhythms are simple behaviors which have a huge return on investment. And so, yeah, it's part of my work and the work of many other people. I think when you see such a great opportunity to have such a great impact on human health in such a simple way, that, it's just screaming to be taken advantage of.
It is. And I think the word you use, simple, is exactly what makes people almost dismiss it, because we're very good at making everything complicated or complex. And yet, a lot of the times, the things that will have the biggest impact on our lives are things like sleeping properly, eating well, and exercising. The very basic things that can make the big impacts on our lives. And yet, they're the things that we have complicated, I guess, over the years. But Daniel, you're a registered nutritionist and functional medicine certified health coach. So I guess we've been talking around this today, but what is functional medicine?
Really interesting. I'm going to circumvent your question a little bit, and I'm
Yeah.
going to tell you a little bit of the story of how I got to where I was. So I'm 30 now. At the age of 20, I went to university after many, many years of ill health, poor physical and mental health, obese, anxious, depressed, lots of issues, autoimmune issues, struggles with skin problems, allergies, you name it. I would have definitely given myself a diagnosis of ADHD back then as well. I did a degree in psychology, so I spent 3 years, and I always laugh and say it taught me a lot about how not to treat people, because undergraduate psychology is very diverse. There's a lot of often conflicting theories about how we should treat human beings, and not many of which take into consideration everything that we've just discussed. I went on to study a master's in nutrition, so I became very interested in the impact and nutrition on my mental and my physical health, and that was like the first step on the journey of 1,000 million continuous steps. And then I became very interested in what you might consider, can be quite a loaded word, holistic health. So through functional medicine, I began to appreciate more the connection between my internal, external environment. So maybe the toxins in the environment, also my mindset and how these things impact health. And then also the mental, emotional, and even spiritual aspects of my health. So my purpose in the world, my sleep, my stress, how I breathed, how I connected with community, all of these different aspects. And so I thought at age 24, 25, when I had studied and completed my master's and my undergraduate, and I'd done my functional medicine training, and I was working in the community, we were putting people through these wonderful holistic health programs, helping them to massively improve their health. I still suffered from a period of burnout in my early career, and my sleep and my health still suffered terribly. And so finding the information around circadian health, and then another area of health education, something we might deem quantum health. So it's beginning to look at the physics and the electricity and all these frequencies and all these things that I'm mentioning. Adding those pieces into the end of that puzzle it's brought me to where I am now, where I have this huge appreciation for the complexity of the connectivity of all the areas when it comes to our well-being. But also when I work with people, I can very easily level with them and say, well, let's imagine that you are a chair. Maybe you're not a four-legged chair, maybe you're a six-legged chair, or maybe you're an eight-legged chair. But ultimately, you're always going to be leaning in one direction if you don't have the simplest of these areas controlled or understood. So quite often improving your nutrition a little bit, fantastic. Moving a little bit, fantastic. Relaxing, de-stressing a little bit, fantastic. Applying a little bit of behavior knowledge towards your sleep environment, fantastic. And so over the course of the last 10 years of my career, it's really been a gradual awareness and understanding of all of these seemingly separate areas of health. And I think, in my early life, just that focus on eating less and moving more, which was the drum that was banged for, 20, 30 years, etc. It's not enough these days. Our environment's changed too much in our cultures, our psychology as human beings. We need more. We're calling out for more. And I think the simplest way that I've found is to go through this initially functional route to help people to understand that it's not just about conventional medicine. There is more out there to help people manage and reverse symptoms and experiences people are having, but then really to step into the new age of light, which is understanding all of this electronics and our relationship with the world and the planet on which we live, basically reconnecting us is what I would say.
Totally. And I that word interconnectivity as well is so important, I think, because for a long time we've treated, as one of my guests said, parts of people as opposed to the person. You've just said you're 30, I'm 50. We were certainly brought up to look at individual parts and not the relationship to the whole. And so it's wonderful to hear you talking about interconnectivity now. Hopefully we're going to hear more of that as time goes on. Now, you've started a foundation, Daniel, Sleep Better, Live Better. Tell us a little bit about that.
I do two things largely. I work with organizations through Sleep Better, Live Better, which is our regular organization, limited company, whatever, how you want to pin it. But I also registered a foundation, which is a side project that is very quickly becoming the main project. And so it was really born out of my aspiration to stop young teenagers, but also now children, from experiencing a lot of the pitfalls that I did around excessive use of technology, screens, bright artificial lights, lack of awareness of all those things and how they're impacting, mental and physical health. I'm sure it doesn't take much to really understand and see now that mental health is probably in the worst state it's ever been for children under the age of 18. Rates of everything from depression to anxiety to suicide to all sorts of things, really struggling. So about 3 or 4 years ago, I had this burning desire and vision to create education and to be able to fund tools at zero cost to consumer and perform research to demonstrate that this whole functional circadian quantum natural approach to improving sleep was probably more needed in younger generations than ever before. My grandest belief is that as a society and as a race, in fact, as a species on planet Earth, I will hold back the foul language, but we've made some mess ups, shall we say, and we've gotten ourselves in a bit of a situation, and the future of the health of our species, provided we don't experience any gigantic natural catastrophes, really is going to hinge upon the ability of our children, our children's children, to out-engineer a lot of the problems that we've generated. Really, we're all engineers. We're always creating solutions to problems, but we can't do that when we're underslept, and we can't do that when our mental and physical health is essentially in the toilet. So coming back to that conversation we had earlier about changing the minds and the hearts and the attitudes of older generations can be a little bit sticky sometimes. But when it comes to younger adults, younger children, the youth, adolescents, teenagers, those sorts of things, when you help a child to realize something so simple as filtering some light coming from a laptop or a mobile phone, or wearing blue light blocking glasses, or going outside for a walk in the morning, or spending a little bit of time outdoors at the weekends in the back garden with your feet on the grass, and they experience a phenomenal change to their health. Funnily enough, they start to turn around and ask their parents and their teachers why they're not doing it too. So that's been an interesting exploration. But essentially now I'm moving the charity from Guernsey in Channel Islands, where I live, and we're going to be registering it globally. And coming up in September, we're running some very big challenge fundraisers to begin to fund what I would call decentralized or independent research in this area, because obviously a lot of research, academic research funding it goes where the money flows, and simple interventions such as those that we're sharing with people, they don't always get the time and attention that they need because there's not often the money to study them, because doing research is really expensive. And I know that because I did a research study last year where we recruited about 400 or 500 children from schools in Guernsey, and we provided them with different sleep-based education interventions, and we studied and measured the changes to their sleep over a period of time, and the results of that have been really, really phenomenal. So that's kind of lit a fire for us to continue to grow, expand, now that we've demonstrated accessibility and efficiency and effectiveness. And I hope that if I have my way, that in 12 months' time, I'll be working less with organizations, not because I don't love people and I don't love adults, but I'll be working primarily with children and institutions, schools, communities across the world to share this education and put it in the hands of children who can make use of it for the rest of their lives.
I love that. And I love the thought of all of these children as well, showing their parents and the other adults in their lives how to do this. I mean, that's your ultimate grassroots revolution. So it sounds like a great plan, Dan. Dan, if people would like to connect with you and learn more about you, what's the best way of doing that?
Yeah, LinkedIn is by far the best place to come and connect with me. I tried for so long to keep on top of like all of the social media channels and the website and the blogging, and I was a solopreneur for a long time. I'm going through a bit of a transitionary period at the moment where I now have there's a team of 4 or 5 of us that are working on our future projects. So in the next couple of months, things are really going to be starting to grow and explode. So we will have a greater reach and more of a shop window, I guess. But at the moment, LinkedIn is the best place to come and find me. There's a lot of blogs, free research articles on there. I post at least semi-consistently, and you can probably get a little bit of one-to-one time chat with me in the box when I'm still not too busy. Other places, I'm on Facebook and Instagram as well. Maybe we'll drop those in the show notes. And then our website is sleepbetterlivebetter.co.uk.
Brilliant. Yes, I'll put all of those details in the show notes. Dan, thank you so much. That was a fascinating conversation, and I wish you the very best with what you're doing in the world. I think it's fantastic.
Thank you so much. And may I share one piece of advice?
Of course.
KISS. KISS. Keep it super simple. Go outside.
I love that because as I wrote my book, I used KISS, which was Keep It Simple, Susan. So now I can go to Keep It Super Simple, and that's brilliant. Thank you for ending with that for everyone. Keep it super simple and go outside.
The person that I found that from he told me to keep it simple, stupid, and I thought
I hate that. Oh, somebody else told me they use sweetheart. Keep it simple, sweetheart. But yeah, so keep it super simple sounds great. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Thank you so much for listening. I hope you've enjoyed the paths we traversed on today's episode. If something rang through for you, be sure to let me know. Or maybe you can share this with someone in your life who would benefit from listening too. And if you enjoy helping others, I'd be so grateful if you would leave a review, so that people who might also be curious about their own life beyond the numbers can discover this podcast too.